We're joined now by Patrick Clawson, who is an Iran expert and a senior fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. I'd like to start by asking about the appointment of Mojtaba Khamenei, who has replaced his father as supreme leader. What message do you see Iran sending the United States, and for that matter, the rest of the world, with this appointment?
This is a guy who's known as being extremely hardline. He is the patron of the Paydari faction. It holds about a quarter of the seats in the parliament, which is known for its extreme positions. So, for instance, they pushed for revising the law about hijab women have to wear to be tougher and tougher penalties over considerable opposition from others within the system. And Mojtaba is also a rather secretive kind of guy. After the 2009 protests about the presidential election that year, when people were blaming Mojtaba for being responsible for much of the repression, we tried at my institute to find pictures of him, and we couldn't. There were just no photos of him available. So this is a guy whose voice has probably not been heard by most Iranians. He's not been a public figure. He's exercised power in the shadows. He's not somebody who inspires confidence on the part of people. He's not someone who's a dramatic speaker like his father.
Okay, yeah, and as you say, no one's ever heard him speak in public, at least that's what we're told, and you're echoing that. He's 56 years old, so about 30 years younger than his father. I mean, does that represent any sort of an opportunity, do you think, in the sense that might he perhaps be a little bit more pragmatic, a little bit more open-minded, or are we just going to get more of the same?
The hope that he's pragmatic is, well, I don't share that. I mean, this is a guy who has a long history of having sponsored some of the most hardline people in Iran, having studied and worked with clerics who were kind of loopy, frankly, and criticized by other clerics for their extreme views of messianic views and so on. And so to say that he's suddenly become a pragmatist, well, I hope that's true, but there's just no evidence of it whatsoever, and a lot of evidence to the contrary.
Why do you think they announced so quickly that he was the successor and he's been sort of inaugurated into that role? Because doesn't that make him an immediate target?
Absolutely makes him an immediate target. And the more prudent thing to do would have been wait until the war was over to announce him. But frankly, the interim leadership council wasn't working out very well. The Revolutionary Guards were very unhappy with what was coming out of that leadership council. The statement by the president in the name of that council, for instance, saying, we're going to stop the attacks on other countries. And the Revolutionary Guards proceeded immediately to attack other countries, just to show they weren't going to pay attention to this. I think there was an interest in showing that the continuity of the Islamic Republic and that the transitional council wasn't going to last very long.
Okay, so you don't think there were particularly necessarily any other serious candidates that were considered?
Oh, sure, there were other serious candidates considered. We know, I mean, what we announced, that Khamenei had given 3 names of people to consider. And it's widely rumored that Mojtaba was not one of those 3 names. And indeed, it is widely rumored that Khamenei had told numerous of his advisors that he did not think that Mojtaba should succeed him because he thought that looked too much like a hereditary monarchy. So we have not seen Ali Khamenei's will. He almost certainly left one. And as I say, the rumors are that that will says, don't name Mojtaba as my successor.
Okay. And you touched on earlier this notion that perhaps there are some cracks emerging. You know, the politicians saying one thing and the clerics clearly giving orders to the contrary. How significant are those cracks, do you think? Is there something here that the United States can work with?
Well, the Revolutionary Guards have spent decades arresting clerics who they didn't think were sufficiently revolutionary, and they thought followed American Islam rather than true revolutionary Islam. So the Revolutionary Guards have got a lot of experience in ignoring clerics.
Do you think this moment, which is obviously a very decisive moment for Iran's history, is actually going to potentially produce an even more hardline leadership than what was there before?
Certainly, there are those in Iran who want to take a harder line. How they'll do, I don't know. But we know that one of the most important advisors of Ali Khamenei, Mr. Shamkhani, who had previously been defense minister, told an interviewer a couple of months ago that he was sorry that Iran hadn't developed nuclear weapons, and so there are going to be people who share that viewpoint.
Okay, and when it comes to looking for ways to engage with the leadership in Iran and all types of leadership, I mean, the pledge of loyalty that was read today says something about fighting and defending the leadership until the last drop of blood. I mean, it doesn't suggest that there is any room for finding some middle ground or negotiating anything at this stage, does there?
Well, indeed, we're hearing a lot of talk about Karbala, which is a famous battle in the early days of Islam, in which Imam Hussein knew that he was going to die, but said that it was better to die on your feet rather than live on your knees, and he wasn't going to accept the humiliating terms. So if that's the vision that these people have, well, we're in for a rough ride.
Do you think the support for the clerics is unchanged as a result of this conflict? And I also just want to ask you, as an extension of that, are there any sort of demographic trends as to where the clerics get their support from? Does it tend to be along age lines, urban, rural lines, class lines? Who's a typical supporter?
Well, by the way, the support is for the Revolutionary Guards much more than for the clerics. There's a lot of clerics who have support of people who don't want politics getting involved in religion. But the support of the Revolutionary Guards comes mostly from a hardcore of followers who tend to be from smaller cities and more rural areas. But it's not a particularly large group, but it's plenty to keep the Islamic Republic in power. Meanwhile, Iran as a whole has aged dramatically. The average age in Iran is the highest of any country in the Middle East. And unfortunately, it's young people who are the ones who are most likely to be out there protesting. And Iran doesn't have that many young people any longer. Average age is 33.
Okay, and obviously Russia is an old, long-standing ally of Iran's, and we saw them conducting joint military exercises last month. President Putin has expressed his unwavering support for the new supreme leader. I'm wondering, in practice, though, how meaningful Russia's support is, how it could be, and do you see other actors being drawn into this conflict?
Well, Russia seems to be providing intelligence to Iran, and that's important. And there's a Chinese spy ship, which has really got impressive capabilities, which is anchored off in the Arabian Gulf nearby, that seems to be doing a lot of spying on U.S. ships. Whether that's sharing information with the Iranians we don't know. But if so, that's very useful for the Iranians. So that kind of intelligence sharing, yeah. And sharing of technology about drones and missiles, not so clear. Drones, almost certainly. Missiles, not so clear.
Yeah, because I mean, for Russia, they're looking at potentially losing a third ally in the space of less than 2 years after Syria, Venezuela, now potentially Iran. I mean, do you think there's a nervousness in Russia that perhaps the next generation of Iranians, and if indeed this leadership is done away with, they'll be very much on the wrong side of history?
And indeed, Putin is also kind of concerned about decapitation strikes by the United States. I mean, that doesn't set a good precedent as far as he's concerned. So here are two major leaders who the United States has either arrested or killed. Putin's not happy about that.
Okay. Just to wrap up, I mean, do you see any realistic pathway to end this conflict at this stage, or is it too early?
Well, there's been a history of Iranian leaders willing, if necessary, to drink the cup of poison, as they said, to ending the Iran-Iraq war in order to hold the system together. But Trump is saying, that's not good enough. I want to see the system go down. It's going to make it hard to end the conflict.
Okay, but we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time. Thank you so much. Patrick Clawson, Iran expert and senior fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Thank you, sir, for your time.
Thank you.
Let's bring into the conversation Mick Mulroy, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense under President Trump. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Mick. Always a pleasure having you on the program. We've heard in the last few hours from the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio. He says, quote, the goals of this mission are clear: to destroy the ability of this regime to launch missiles, both by destroying their missiles and launchers, destroying their factories that make these missiles, and destroy their navy. As far as you're aware, and here we are on day 10 of this conflict, what has been achieved so far?
So, Tom, a lot has been achieved based on what you just said the Secretary Rubio laid out as objectives. They're clearly military objectives, and the U.S. military and the Israeli, IDF has gone a long way toward meeting that. They've significantly depleted the ballistic missile launchers, the storage facilities, over 14 subterranean storage facilities hit. And now they're really going toward the manufacturing capabilities of Iran to make new ballistic missiles. And, of course, the suicide one-way drones, the Shaheds, both to the storage facilities, launch sites, and their ability to make them. So I think that has largely been met. More to go. And also, of course, the naval, I think the last I've seen is about 70 vessels have been sunk. That's unbelievable, to be frank, that many have been taken out. That has a lot to do with their ability to close key waterways like the Straits of Hormuz. So a lot of, I think, advancements there. The last, when it comes to strategic assets, is the nuclear facilities. We struck them, of course, before, so they've already been seriously degraded. They're a fixed target, so I think we're going to come back around and drop even more, quite frankly, large, massive ordnance penetrators to make even more damage and more degradation of their capabilities. The one part that doesn't seem to be headed in the right direction, and the U.S. might just take it off the list, is regime change.
Right. And one thing that has confused a lot of people in the region that I'm speaking to you from is that the Iranian president said that the attacks on GCC countries would come to an end on Saturday, and then suddenly we saw them actually stepping up their attacks in some places. I'm wondering how difficult it would be for the United States to put a stop to that. And I know Pete Hegseth said last week that the US had air dominance in the skies over Iran. I mean, given that air dominance, can they put a stop to these attacks?
So we do have air supremacy now. So we moved from superiority, which just meant we have the advantage, to one in which we completely control the skies for all intents and purposes. But when it comes to stopping these attacks against our allied countries, our partner countries in the region, they're incredibly difficult, because what we expected is for Iran to attack the military facilities where U.S. military personnel were present. We have a lot of capabilities to defend that. But it turns out that they not only attacked that, they also attacked civilian targets, downtown Dubai, Doha, Bahrain. They've attacked desalination plants, oil infrastructure. It's very difficult to blanket coverage for the entirety of the region. It's also very expensive, because our interceptor missiles are far more expensive and in short supply than the Shahed drones, which are very easily made, launched, and very inexpensive. So this is going to be one of the biggest challenges the United States has to help our partners defend themselves.
And when you said that regime change wasn't going quite so well, when you made that comment a little earlier on, I just wonder what you meant, actually.
Well, of course, the president has made reference to the desire to have a change in the regime, and the Secretary of Defense has made statements that although the point isn't regime change, they've changed the regime, which is true. They've taken out almost 50 of their senior leaders, probably more. However, we just saw the selection of the new supreme leader, which is Mojtaba Khamenei, so the son of the former supreme leader, whose history with the IRGC is extensive. He actually started with the IRGC Quds Force, which is a very specialized unit inside the IRGC. He's also worked to control the besieged. That's the military element of the IRGC that keeps any invasion out and keeps any protest down. He's very much aligned with their perspective, and as some analysts would say, is probably more anti-Israel and anti-U.S. than his father was. And certainly he has indicated that he has no desire to negotiate with the United States nor surrender. So the regime seems to be intact, yes, seriously degraded, but not a change of heart, and potentially even more hardline than before.
We did hear President Trump before this inauguration of the new Supreme Leader saying that if the new Supreme Leader did not have US approval, he, quote, would not last long. How do you interpret that?
Seems like a direct threat. Obviously, the United States and Israel has exceptional intelligence, as we saw from the decapitation strike that led this war. I assume that's what he means there. I know that this individual would have to guess that he is a direct target, and that essentially intelligence community, as CIA and Mossad, is trying to find out where and when he's going to be, and that likely would result in another strike. We'll see what happens there. I'm sure he's taken this into account, but we have shown that we have quite the capabilities to identify where and when individuals should be for these type of leadership strikes.
I wanted to ask you, Mick, about one of the reports that's been circulating. There were these reports that some American soldiers had been captured, but US Central Command saying they have no information in that regard. What do you make of that? I don't know if you've seen those reports. Do you think there's any thread of credibility to them?
I don't think the Pentagon would even attempt to try to say that if something like that did happen, that it didn't. Quite frankly, that would be readily known to everyone. We've seen a lot of erroneous reports, specifically what Iran has and hasn't done. I think I've seen the Iranian regime put out multiple times that they've actually struck U.S. aircraft carriers, specifically the Lincoln, and that's obviously not the case. And this might be more of that. If that was in fact the case, I think it would be almost impossible for the U.S. military or U.S. government to be able to prevent that from coming out in multiple different means.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. I wanted to ask you a little bit more about what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz, because obviously the threat of Iranian missile and drone attacks has stopped a lot of tankers from carrying oil and gas through that important waterway. And I'm just wondering what the US can do to get that waterway working again.
So the U.S. has planned for this. It's been a threat for some time. We have the ability to clear, if they were to sea mine it, to clear it. That could take weeks, if not months. And of course, we then would have to convince commercial ships that it's safe. But right now, just from the threat of targeting it, has essentially done the same thing, shut down the Straits of Hormuz. That's 20% of the world's oil and liquefied gas goes through that. And also other things like nitrogen that's really important for agriculture around the world also comes from this region. So it's critically important that it stays, or it goes open again. And I think that's why the U.S. is talking about naval escorts. So the U.S. Navy going through with ships to ensure that they're not attacked, and obviously countering any threat to them. Again, that's something that could be offered by the United States, but doesn't necessarily have to be accepted by these commercial ships who still wouldn't want, or might not want to take that risk. And even if they did, insurance companies have to agree to insure the ships that go through there, even with a naval escort. So there's no guarantee, but this is one of the biggest pressure points that Iran has on the rest of the world to bring this war to an end.
Right. I mean, Iran has a couple of pressure points, and, you know, it could be argued that their strikes on Gulf nations fall into that category. We've also seen in the last couple of days Iranian rockets, or rockets from Iranian-backed groups, I should probably say, targeting the US embassy in Baghdad. We've seen what's been happening in Lebanon. Do you see this conflict widening even further?
Well, it's quite possible, Tom. We've seen, as you already mentioned, these proxy forces for Iran inside Iraq. Of course, they have several, and Hezbollah being their longest and most extensive, which is why Israel has launched so many attacks against them to basically preemptively keep them out, at least not effectively in this regional conflict. There's also a report out today by multiple U.S. media outlets saying that the U.S. has intercepted communications out of Iran that appear to be activating sleeper cells around the world. So this is another avenue that the Iranian regime could use. They obviously are conventionally completely overmatched, but they can use these gray area, black area type operations where they go after diplomatic facilities, diplomatic presence around the world, and even civilians inside Europe and inside the United States. That is a great concern to the counterterrorism law enforcement agencies around the world, especially in the United States, as we are, obviously a combatant in this conflict. So there's a lot of things that Iran can do that expand this greatly and could have a major impact on the future of this conflict.
And just lastly, I mean, there is this concern that Iran does have some enriched uranium. I'm just wondering if you think they do, and if they did, would they be able to do something with it, i.e. launch some sort of an attack on countries around the world using that enriched uranium?
So they're believed to have almost 1,000 pounds, so 441 kilograms of highly enriched uranium, up to 60%. The question is, where is it? I think a lot believe that it's buried under the Isfahan facility where we targeted and essentially collapsed. That would obviously make it very difficult for them to get to. If that's not the case, they could turn this 441 kilograms into around 10 nuclear weapons. It can't be done quickly. They have to miniaturize it, develop the triggering mechanism, and then, of course, the delivery mechanism. But that is one of the biggest concerns. That's why there's a lot of talk, including by the President of the United States, about injecting ground forces in to try to recover this. But the question I would have is it recoverable? Because it's one thing to go through an intact facility, breach doors, and get to the location where it's stored. It's another to actually excavate a collapsed facility, since we dropped multiple massive ordnance penetrators on these facilities. So that's the big question. Obviously, the intelligence communities from the United States and Israel are working very closely on that.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate your time. Mick Mulroy, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense under President Trump. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Tom.